Hello again, welcome back to RP-0 America. Last time we were throwing something at Mars and I believe I got a crash while I went to do a mid-course correction. So I completed the mid-course correction. It was pretty small and easy, just used the RCS. So we're targeting the moon. Relative inclination is nice and low. It's a pre-dawn launch, but unfortunately not close enough that it's going to look cool on the way up. Alright, so let's see, just close that for my last attempt. So I was trying to use MechJeb to carry out the transfer burn, and unfortunately it didn't quite leave me enough time to ullage my fuel, and so I tried lighting the engine while my fuel was still risky. So I'm doing it again. I poked through the MechJeb menus. I couldn't quickly find an option. That's why these are up now. Quickly find an option to tell it when to jump out of warp a little earlier, but it's all right. I'm pretty sure it'll be sufficient. I just unlocked the fuel on my probe, and that will allow it to push forward a little bit, help me a little bit with the ullage, and that should be good. So I'll be able to settle my fuel for the trip to the moon. And I must have done too much clicking because I lost target. That's like one of those pet peeves that I'm curious. I haven't bugged people enough to figure out really what is going on. But see if I click, well, I don't know why it's not. Is it just on a menu or a window? Okay, fine then. Maybe it's just in this focus. Who knows? But I was looking at relative inclination, and if I click buttons like these ones in this view too frequently, too quickly, it takes away my focus, which doesn't make any sense to me, but fair enough. I'm sure it has other uses where I just use it subconsciously, but in this case it's just annoying and a pain. Alright, so let's just pitch down a little more and do a little bit of time warping. So I did some more research on the Ranger and Mariner program and did a lot of reading on the interesting failures of the early Ranger program. They were having a lot of trouble integrating the vehicle and everything, let alone with the payload. Like they were doing some pre-launch tests, and they ended up popping the solar panels would fold up to fit inside the fairing, and while it was still on the pad, they had those pop out. So within the fairing, the solar panels tried to deploy themselves and probably damaged something. But that's a sign that you're having a lot of trouble in your program development. The point where the decision they made on that count was to just decide, okay, well, we're not going to do any tests on the pad then of the payload. We feel it's being tested well enough at the factory, and that didn't go well. And so many Rangers later, the Block 3, the third type of Ranger, started having successes with like Ranger 7 or 8 or something like that. So interesting to look at. So they had some different goals with the Ranger program. They're aimed at the moon. They wanted to do some flybys and some crashes into the moon. And then that was later followed up by the aptly named Lunar Orbiter program, which you only get one guess of what the goal of that was. Let's see, so I'm just watching for about 2:14, and that'll be about when I want to drop the ring. But it looks like I didn't arc down enough, so I'm just going to drop it a little early, because this is starting to get up towards an altitude. I don't want to quite climb too high. I don't want to spend too much of my energy getting into a higher altitude. So the later Rangers were successful, and they were much more specialized in the hardware I'm going to rush through as I kind of finish out this series. There we go, pop those off. See, the probe they would send to Mars versus the probe that they would do flybys of the moon look a bit different, I believe. And they would specialize the moon probes for depending on whether you're going to do a flyby of it or whether they're going to try to crash into it. And they wouldn't just crash into it for fun. When you're approaching the moon at a very high speed with a crasher probe, you can take some pictures as long as you design the hardware really well, which they did by those later Rangers, the Block 3 Rangers. So you take a whole bunch of really high quality pictures as you're approaching the moon, and it's really critical during those last few seconds before you hit the moon surface that you get pictures, and you get good pictures, and you send those back to Earth. And they did successfully take many pictures in that program of the moon from close up. And really, past that point, they had really good luck with the Ranger program. I'm just going to take science. Not that I care too much about this science, just that I don't want that pops you at a time warp, and I'm going to use some time warp to get to my lunar burn. So yeah, these burns take a bit of time to get into orbit, so I'm just going to use a bit of time warp. So just keeping an eye on time to AP, make sure this doesn't wander off too much. It looks like it's doing good. And compare time to AP to this. So AP is still going to be a little bit of a ways off. Good, I didn't click through that too fast when this stage burns out. So I'm just going to aim myself right at pitch 0. Yeah, so because I got things together so quickly, again, thanks to Schnobs, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name properly, for giving me this nice generalist probe, I was able to accomplish these missions a lot quicker in real time than I thought I'd be able to. So I might go about, again, trying to design something a little further, and something that a friend of mine on the Realism Overhaul IRC is having a lot of trouble with is designing, like, around my level of tech, designing a craft, checking for fuel, that can successfully soft land on the moon with this kind of early level tech. And people give him lots of advice, but ultimately it's been a while since any of us really did it. Like I'm not even sure I've had success. If you look in my Russian series, I tried to do a similar thing and just had a series of failures. Because with a craft of this mass, it's pretty difficult to get enough mass in the influence of the moon to be able to do a soft landing. So I think that's what my stretch goal of my time before 1.1 is going to be, to try to design something to help out Agathorn and myself included, anybody else, trying to go for these lunar firsts, because like I said, there's a lot of money to be made, and once you can land, you can start soft landing even really tiny, whatever the smallest you can design probes on the moon. There's a lot of science to be had down there as well. And that science really helps you to unlock those techs towards crewed missions towards the moon. So that's going to be my next goal. Once I successfully get this, get a flyby of the moon, which I should definitely get with this, and potentially with this, maybe even an orbit of the moon. But getting an orbit of the moon, at least once I hit this level of technology, isn't much more difficult, in my experience, than just getting into orbit of the moon, because you only need 600 or 700 extra delta V to do that. And so basically a probe like this is perfect for that, right? If you have a bit of extra delta V in the probe like this, I've got 700, that might just in and of itself be enough to get me into orbit of the moon. Even if this is completely expended on my way, on sending me to the moon, it's called the translunar injection burn, this final stage of my craft will have enough delta V to potentially get me into an orbit. But the next really difficult step in that is to design something that can land on the moon. Something kind of the same level of difficulty, I find, or at least where you start to have trouble with this mass of lifters, like the Atlas-sized first stage and like an Aegina B-sized second stage, is designing something that can not just do a flyby of Mars or Venus, but also still have enough delta V and like hypergolic fuels like these that don't boil off in space, or solid fuel as well as avionics control to be able to do another burn when it's in the influence of Mars or Venus, to be able to capture into an orbit. That I find that it's a bit more straightforward of a goal, but like really landing on any body is super challenging. So it's one of those things I particularly enjoy doing in RP-0. And that's why I really look forward to 1.1 having better wheel physics, or slowly, gradually developing that, or mods helping with that, because I'd really like to put rovers on the moon or rovers on Mars. And because any kind of rover I've tried to drive in the past does not have any luck. It just rolls over. It's kind of just skids down a hill. Just doesn't have good behavior with the ground. But kind of at this point in 1.1, I'd hopefully like to see the stock wheels behaving a little better, or mods that help with that. And I'm going to start kind of putting some of my time and effort into trying to figure out what's making that more difficult. What numbers do we need to balance? Because of course, Realism Overhaul also has to overhaul our settings for that. For how's wheel physics going to behave, and what numbers do we tweak to make them realistic and functional. So you can't just build a probe, put it on the moon, and drive it around at 100 kilometers an hour, for example. So I just want to do a home and transfer to target. I have the moon targeted, create node, and mech jab, recognizing one that'll get me pretty close to the moon, nearly a collision, which is nice. So Actually, it did a collision last time. Oh, maybe it's my relative inclination kind of messed it up. That's all right. So I've got 34 minutes till that burn. Landing guidance, maneuver node, editor. All right. So again, this time I'm going to trust it to carry out the burn. I just need to be better about my ullage. I need to get the fuel settled before MechJeb comes into play. So let me just see which of these numbers do I need to tweak in order to... No, it's definitely not going to be those. Okay, maybe a bit more oomph in those. I might not be able to get a crash into the moon with this high of a relative inclination, which I guess is okay. I mean, that's within 5,000 kilometers, so that'll be good enough, I believe, to get the science low from the moon. That's a shame. I was kind of hoping to be able to crash into the moon with this mission. But hey, you know, that kind of shows where the limitations are, where you start to need to really worry about that. About when you're not close enough to the right inclination. If you're doing this strategy to get to the moon. Yeah, it's just no matter how I manipulate these numbers, I wish there was a reset button. 0, yeah, that's close enough to 0. Okay, so that's the closest it looks like I'm going to get without doing a mid-course correction. And I don't have enough fuel to do a mid-course correction, so I just should have paid more attention to that. That's okay. This, in practice, will be my first flyby, and it's not the most expensive craft, so I'll be okay. I can build another craft just like this. It'll have more reliable engines, so a higher probability of success, because there's a good chance that this engine could fail, since I just have not very much data on it, because it's the second, it's the -7 version of this engine, so it only inherited a little of my previous experience with the previous engine. I'm just going to point myself. I'm going to abuse precision rotation because this is one of the coolest things about it. There we go, or at least just functionally, just for a time and energy and RCS fuel saver. You can just do a light push towards your target, and then just time warp to go towards it. And then if I cheat and turn on SAS and then time warp, it will kind of kill that rotation and lock me there. So I'm just going to get just a little closer to that and then lock it in. There we go. All right, and now this time, before I do this, because I don't want to have to re-record this from scratch, I'm going to save, and if I have to quick save back to here, then I quick save back to here. So at this point, yep, the fuel is unstable, and that's kind of the goal, that's the point. It should be unstable. Here, let me switch to a free cam. There we go. All right. So I'll need to settle the fuel. I'm going to let MechJeb carry this out. So one quick thing to know about letting MechJeb carry out your maneuvers in realism overhaul, it can and will sometimes waste your ignitions. So you kind of have to follow a very specific process. And MechJeb might refine this later on, in a month or two, once MechJeb has kind of done a bit more polish and niceness for just the non-realism overhaul people. But right now, I just need to be careful. So if I turn on RCS and do pulses like this, it'll go from very unstable through to stable. So I'll need to do that before the burn. Oh, and of course that made me wander off. And so MechJeb will pop out of time warp a bit before the burn. There we go, just save again. And that will allow me to settle the fuel before the burn, but I need to kind of be on the ball. So one thing for MechJeb to carry this out, you want the engine to be staged and on before you give it power to execute the node, and I find that it's best, possibly be only possible, but I can't say that with certainty. I just know the voodoo, the process I follow that works is make sure the engine you're going to be having run has been staged normally, like through the space bar. For a lot of things, I would usually just turn this on through here, like it's the red, it's the button with a little cover on it. So I have to, it's not just mashing spacebar to turn on an engine. But I found that was when MechJeb had a bit of trouble with it when I was turning it on through here. So make sure you got it on. So if you haven't needed to use it yet to this point, just throttle down your engine and then spacebar to turn it on to activate it. But that won't consume an ignition. All right, so I've got everything ready. I just need to go execute next node. And then MechJeb is gonna, I guess it wants to point it a little more precisely there. I might get popped out of time warp, yep, by a gravity scan, okay, and then pop back out of time warp. So as soon as it pops out, you need to keep an eye on, it's going to do this final pop out of time warp, and it's probably good to keep an eye on those arrows. That as soon as it pops down to 1, you want to start hitting H to ullage your engine, because you don't have any time to waste. Once MechJeb is down to time warp 1, it's committed. You could obviously abort the execution, but in this case, so once it popped down to just 1x time warp, there we go. Now I'm just pulsing it to keep it that way, because the fuel will go back to unstable after enough time. So I'm just pulsing it to keep it stable, and then the engine's throttled up and ignited. So now I can turn the RCS off, and this is a gimbaled engine, so it's going to keep itself pointed straight, or as straight as it can without wasting any of my RCS fuel. Yeah, so that is how you can get MechJeb to carry it out. And just the best thing I find about MechJeb in a case like this is it's going to, you want to make sure this isn't just 0.1, because how high your acceleration is. So, okay, I'm going to try to use RCS to get it to stop wobbling. Maybe go to the lower RCS. It's going to waste some delta V, but it looks like I've got just a little bit that's okay to... Oh, something happened. Let me see. What happened to my engine? Loss of thrust. Oh, man. So my specific impulse is still good, but I have lower thrust than I had before. So actually, I had a test flight failure. So thankfully, there's a couple different versions of an engine failure. It can just completely fail, and I wouldn't be able to carry out the mission. Here, the thrust is about half of what it was before, but my specific impulse is the same. So in practice, a burn is going to take twice as long as it would have taken otherwise. Let me see if I can get it to wobble less using just resetting this or setting this number a little lower. Oof, okay, well, it's wobbling more violently. What if I tell it to use stock? There we go. Sometimes the stock SAS is a bit better. Sometimes, not always. It looks like in this case it's behaving better, and that might just be because it had tuned values for the PID, for MechJeb's flight computer, for this engine, and when it was down to half the thrust, it just wasn't behaving as well. So yeah, so that has popped up. We have an issue with the engine. Oh, and it failed. Engine shut down. All right. So this engine is not going to send us to the moon. All right. Well, fair enough. That's like my second attempt to go, and yeah, it's happened. So my first Ranger failed as well. So fair enough. And I don't have any more burns to ignite, and I'm not even sure it would go back on. But I got one type of failure at first, and they weren't the most likely failure. That's not the smallest number, but you know, they'll happen sometimes. So there we go. So this probe is going to be stranded, and we did have good luck here. Let me kill you. We did have good luck with the previous mission. So if I was being honest and just playing this myself, I would just accept that failure, because again, in my own play, I enjoy that. The chance that something can fail, you kind of have to have a backup craft or something in practice. I don't have the cache in play, and I'm recording a series, so I'm going to jump back to before that happened. Because I am a filthy save scrummer. Yeah, it's kind of part of the balance, I guess, of doing this as a video, just taking video of this, because and RVE is probably not going to be happy with that as well. RVE will visit its vengeance upon me and make the clouds and everything look crazy. All right. So did I have the maneuver in place? I did. All right. So yeah, when you quick load into a situation, the RVE clouds are crazy. Yeah, like I do like those failures, but part of the issue is I have my RP-0 settings. I just don't have enough cache to have a backup craft for this, which I would have had normally in my own play, and it just doesn't. I just don't have that many more videos I'm able to make before I finish up this series, and I do want to get these complete. So I just have to sacrifice a little bit of my own preference of play for to make this a better video. And I don't think I have enough voice left today to try to do this again. Yeah, so is it popping me out of time warp because of science? Possibly. Yeah. Gravity scan. There you go. So yeah, everything that happened before still applies. I just need to keep an eye out here, and once we pop down into 1x time warp, I need to ullage my fuel. And there's already somebody with an eye. If you're interested in, sure, right now we just have engines failing, and that's the only thing that can really fail. X Shadow X is very interested and is making many other parts capable of failure and all kinds of various and creative failures. And that's something I definitely want to have in my stock play. But in currently, at least how our RP-0 is, I feel like that would make it too difficult for me. I'm not that good of a player, and so having anything able to fail right now would be pretty difficult, and that requires a lot of balancing. And even right now, I'm spending a good bit of my kind of time in this series trying to tabulate and gather data so we can have good failure data for these engines. Like, I'm still gathering data for a Soviet engine, the RD-0110, something like that. Anyway, so we're trying our second attempt towards the moon. So you can see it has a pretty, doesn't have the highest failure chance here, but that number will decrease as we approach the rated burn time of this engine. But and also after you've had another failure, I imagine another, once you've had failure number 1, failure number 2 has a higher probability. And I was lucky, that failure number 1 wasn't a complete failure of the engine as well. But yeah, there's just all kinds of neat things, like an antenna that won't behave. If you get your flyby, everything works nice, but one of your science instruments just isn't going to gather science, and it, you know that it's not a realism overhaul an RP-0 glitch because it tells you, this is jammed or this experiment has failed, or a solar panel just fails. All kinds of interesting little failures that would make it a bit more challenging to carry out these missions and more realistic. Not just a false challenge, but that's why a lot of these things actually failed in history. There we go. And so, best thing about maneuver, the auto node is that it carries it out and shuts down the engine very close to where you would want to. It's a computer, so it has a better reaction time than I have. So I believe that's going to get me an encounter with the moon. I suppose there's only one way to find out, which is to time warp towards it. Oh, no, it looks like I'm a little bit off. So, okay. So I'm just hitting my N and my... Let me see. I want to be a little stingy with my fuel. So, oh, I see. So I'm a little far out. You can see here, like, ideally my APO would be closer to the orbit of the moon. So I'm going to reverse myself. I still want to use what hydrazine I have in here. I did unlock this fuel to help me with ullaging, but I do want to preserve it as best I can. So I'm going to try to make use of the Agena itself to get me a better... Oof, I'm terrible at this. Because I should, in theory, just be able to do a single impulse in the right direction and be able to swing myself towards the position I want to be in, but in practice, I can never do that. There we go. So it looks like I'm swinging back towards that way, and I'm not going to cheat. Okay, so this is done. That engine's just done. We're out of fuel with it, I think, or we're close enough, out of ignitions. So now when I thrust forward, it's going to do the RCS. So I'm just going to tell it to save my position here and thrust backwards, because that's going to get these closer. So I want that moon encounter. So this is like a very minor, this is a really tiny delta V requirement, because in practice my Agena, the hydrazine I have is just a couple of dozen kilograms, if that, and that's just enough to give me like under 50 meters per second of delta V. Oh, there we go. And just do little pulses of it. See, look how small the g-force of this thrust is, but because it's for an event so far in the future, it has a substantial impact on the actual orbit. Okay, and that's close enough. That's pretty close to our original intended 1100 and some. And I barely used any of the hydrazine in this, right? It was just a tiny correction we needed to make. So I was kind of, after all the failures, I was kind of ready to consider it a failure, but looks like it was fine. So I'm going to retain this for the for maybe mid-course corrections or something else, because so this is as close as I could get with any, you saw me kind of fiddle with the maneuver node. That's as close as I could get with burns here. But because I still have avionic control, because I do still have the fuel in here as well as in here, I might be able to get closer by doing a mid-course correction. So that's what I'll be looking at in the next video. So thanks for watching. You watched a failure and then a successful burn towards the moon with our first craft that's going to go by, do a flyby of the moon, and potentially get us into orbit of the moon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.